thanks very much for saying yes, that you wanted to have an interview, a chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. I'd obviously, when you sent through that email initially, inviting me to have a look. I know Tom real well, Barris, from racing and stuff. So I'd seen, the stuff you'd done with him, and I'd seen one or two other things. I'd done a little bit of work coaching wise with a couple of people that he'd spoken to as well. So it was already on my radar, but like anything in life, I just hadn't organised myself enough to be a regular kind of looking at it as it came out with the blog. So it was cool anyway. And I think it's really good. I think it's just nice, isn't it? Maybe to pass on a bit of experience, and if people pick up on that, that's great.
Yeah.
Not that I know everything, but you live through that experience, don't you? And there's a lot of people I know through coaching. Obviously, a lot of people starting out on that journey. So if you can maybe pass a bit of experience on, I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I really appreciate it. There's quite a lot to cover, so we'll go through as much as we can. But as a brief intro, so what you rode track, you rode on the road. So what multi British national medalist, Yorkshire Road Race champion, UCI Road Race winner, business owner, Mint Cycling, and also a principal transport planner, which would be interesting to get into that, because that's something that I didn't realise. And you've ridden with some of the iconic domestic teams, Pinarello and Sigma Sports, ridden with Russ Downing, Matt Stevens. So your experience within cycling must be it must be fascinating to see how it's progressed. And you've ridden with some big names and been at the front of some top races. So I mean, how does it, when you look back at your career, what are your thoughts now?
I think I'm super happy actually. I don't have any huge regrets about time racing. I think it's always good, isn't it, after the benefit of a few years away from something, to look back and feel good about it and look at the positives in it, and then sort of almost sit back, because you listed it there and thought, oh wow, kind of what a journey almost. I think when you immediately finish, you're almost a bit tired and beaten up by it all, and because quite often the last year or last 18 months is you're either winding down and you're going to finish, so there's that element to it, or you maybe not quite up as a front as you used to be, so you get a bit of a kicking down the back. And it's not that you enjoy it any less, but I guess because you've almost made a decision to stop, you don't look back as you do after a few years after. Looking back now, I mean, it's been 7 years I think since I stopped racing. I feel quite privileged, I guess, to have ridden for those teams and with those people and shared those experiences. And no huge regrets. It would have been nice to have a national medal on 3 occasions. I was pretty close to getting the national jersey. It would have been nice to have had a national jersey. We were super close one year in the Madison Champs on the track. I wouldn't say it was a regret, but it would have been nice, to just them small margins, maybe just pinch the national jersey. Yorkshire Divs, obviously super chuffed to have won that. That's basically the Worlds where I live.
That's the real jersey.
You've got credibility. You've got credibility where I live in Yorkshire, because it's, all regions are tough, but you were sort of my era. You were riding against Tanner and Lovett and Wayne Randall when I was younger, obviously the Downings. So it was a real kind of race to win as well. So super chuffed that's on the Palmares, if you like. But absolutely loved it. And for me, it was as much about kind of the journey and who you met and the experiences you had as it was about the results. I was talking to Russ Downing just the other day. We were talking about something and nothing, and we were remembering sort of times in Norway when we were racing together. And and still really good friends with a lot of people that I rode with. I've got young kids now. A lot of them have got young kids the same age. So we might not be racing, but we still meet up and we still got that connection. So and like looking back through all the teams, really different experiences, some good, some bad. For just because you're at that level, that kind of UCI bottom rung of the ladder, you never quite know how long it's going to last or what's going to hang around. So no bad experiences through people, just different experiences each team. But look back with really, really good memories. Super enjoyed it.
Yeah. And when you sent me a message a while back, and you practically done my interview questions for me, which is brilliant. I mean, I mean, the focus of the gear change is very much on, I suppose, preparing for life after cycling, but whilst you're still cycling. You know, so it's not saying, you know, think now for when it's going to end. It's just putting steps in place. It's about how can you prepare for when that time comes, so that you can transition hopefully more smoothly. And you know, there are lots of things that you said you wanted to talk about in terms of, you know, understanding your sponsors, developing partnerships, etc. But can you just describe, I suppose, how precarious the sport is? You know, when you're riding with domestic teams that you don't know if they're going to go pop or not. You know, what's that experience like?
Yeah, I think it changes over time. I think when you first go into that level. So I kind of, I didn't grow up having huge aspirations of winning the Tour de France or anything like that. I enjoyed cycling for what it was. I was enjoying riding with the club. I actually played rugby, which everyone always laughs at because I'm not particularly big. So until kind of 15, 16, I didn't even think about riding at that level, really. It was something that came about during university because I had spare time. So I just, by definition, rode more and got better. So I guess I'd already committed to going to university, so I had a degree anyway. And I would look back and think I'm super chuffed I did that, you know, to have had a sports management degree, which was basically business management. And, you know, I look back and the skills that gave me actually, not just finishing cycling, but actually through cycling to understand how do you market yourself? How do you sort of almost treat yourself as a self-employed business person? Because that's in effect what you are. You know, you have to exist at that level, you have to market yourself, you have to be appealing to teams, you have to know a bit about how you manage your finances. So I had kind of an upper hand, I guess, than a lot of people that wouldn't have gone through that before I even started riding at that level. So yeah, I finished uni, then I was on the Dave Rayner Fund. And then, so by the time I started riding at UCI team, I was already quite acutely aware of, it's quite precarious from a business point of view. You only ever get a year contract.
Yeah.
I once had a 2-year contract, but the majority of times you get a year contract. You're only as good as your last win. So, you know, you can get to the end of the year and quite easily have your wages halved if you've not had the year that you wanted. And the teams are, you know, they are precarious, like you said. You know, you'll start out with the team buses and the 3 team cars, and you can quite easily end up with you're all packed in the back of a transit van and the very same team by the end of the year. So, you know, it's all in the hands of your sponsors, really. You know, how much money do they have that they're willing to put into the team? What's the driving force behind it? It tends to be somebody with a passion for the sport. You know, my whole time riding at that level, I think maybe other than the Pinarello and the Sigma years, I guess was slightly more secure because they're in the cycling industry. So there's a reason for them to be sponsoring those teams. But even then, it's generally driven by someone with just a passion to support you. And at any point, their passion might change. You know, they might want to go and do something else and put their money into something else, or they might just not have the income that they did at the start of the year. So,
what's that like as a rider that you've got that level of uncertainty? So obviously you're trying to perform when you're racing, but you're also in the back of your mind you're thinking this team might not be here. Is it just sort of something that's just accepted as a part of the sport, or does it sit there?
Yeah, I think it was just accepted when I rode. I think in the sort of generation that I rode, things were getting better. So we had the onset of the Tour Series, the Tour of Britain was back. So I think we sort of accepted the precarious nature of the teams because we wanted to ride in those level of races. So you just accepted it. And I think for me, up until I was about 25, 26, I just accepted it. I thought any minute this could go pop. And if it does, I'll have to sort something else out. And then I think with age, you know, you gain more, don't you? So by the time you're 25, 26, all of a sudden you're covering your mortgage, you've all these associated things in real life around you that do cost money, and you do need some security, you know, whether it's supporting a partner or your mortgage or, you know, people who are having little ones. As you grow older, you get more responsibilities and you become more aware then of your precarious situation. I remember having a discussion with my wife and sort of saying, "Oh, my contract's up in 3 weeks and I don't have a team yet." And to me, the previous 5 years, that probably wouldn't have been a problem. I just trusted something would come along, because it invariably kind of did. But I remember having a discussion with my wife, and she thought that was absolutely bonkers.
That's scaring me. That's scaring me just hearing it.
Yeah, and so that's what changes. I think that's completely what changes. I think you reach an age where you become aware of that as well, and you think actually this is all could end any minute, and I haven't got a plan. So yeah, I think by the time I reached Sigma Sport, I probably was mid-20s, and I was aware that I had to have things in the background. I couldn't just ride kind of blindly. That riding at that level was always going to be the same. It was never guaranteed. You never knew. You had a contract, but you couldn't necessarily trust everything that was written on it. You never knew what you were doing the year after. So yeah, by the time I got to sort of mid-20s and joined Sigma Sport, I was acutely aware of this could end at any minute, however well you're doing. So yeah, but riding at that level is not easy. It's not easy at all. And I think as you get older, it becomes more difficult because you have more responsibilities that are driven by the contracts you're on and things like that. So, and I don't think it's changed. I think it's as precarious now as it was then. And I think it's just that's that level. If you're slightly higher, then you obviously are on those minimum wages, there's sort of security blankets around you. If you're slightly lower, you would probably have a job. If you're in that middle ground, you're arguably too busy to have a real committed job, but you're not on a team that can give you too much security. So you just accept it, I guess. You do accept it, but you also get a bit beaten up by it. And I think I've seen people around me, people you've spoken to actually, and myself, I had years where it really beat me up. It does get to you, because as much as you want it, it's difficult to sort of exist on wondering what you're going to be doing all the time sometimes.
Yeah. And when that did start to sink in, when you said you were in your mid-20s, what did you start to do differently? How did you put those steps in place to have a plan?
Yes, I had a couple of things that happened to me, I guess, which although were unlucky, in the long term probably did me a favour. So I joined Plowman Craven in 2009. The team went bust in the middle of the year, and it was the best contract I was ever on. Great team, everything. The team that really should have gone, if you like, for me. And I was so fed up. I got to the middle of the year, I was sat at home. I wasn't riding any races. I couldn't ride for any other team because of the UCI rules. Couldn't leave till August. Was turning up to ride races, and the checks had bounced, so we were having to enter the things ourselves. And it kind of hacked me off so much that I almost fell out of love with cycling, and I started looking at, what am I going to do otherwise? I had my degree, had a bit of experience in preparing for work, but I never had done. So at 2009, I kind of prepared anyway to go into work while I still had a contract. I only had a minimum contract because I only got the UCI bond. I didn't get anything from the team, but I got a minimum payout from the UCI because of the rules. So I had a month. So I prepared for work. So I kind of did all my coaching qualifications that year because I thought, I want to use my experience. I'd done sports science elements at uni. So I just started planning, right, I want to stay in cycling, but I'm not going to be a rider anymore. So did coaching qualifications, did sports nutrition, anything that interests me. I thought I'll just do it and I'll have it in the background. And then I actually carried on riding because Matt Stevens rang me up and said, come join Sigma. So I didn't use any of them in the end. I did all these qualifications, and then went riding again.
But you used that time, so that sort of space where perhaps other riders might have been sitting there, I don't know, in a different state of mind. You very quickly used that time effectively.
Yeah, and what I did is I just carried on with that. So then any training camps, sitting in the vans, you drive a lot of your time at that level. You're sitting around because you're traveling. So you'd be sat in the back of a team van traveling to Brittany to do a race, which for me up in West Yorkshire is a fair hack. So you sat for 2 days. So I just became acutely aware that year when everything nearly stopped that I needed to start using my spare time instead of just sitting up with my legs up recovering, watching Thumbs and the Hammer or whatever it might be. I need to be a bit more productive here. This is going to end. So I did my coaching qualifications in that one block. And then the year afterwards, I carried on with that. So I started then looking into sort of sustainable transport and doing anything that interests me really. So whether they were online courses, whether they were kind of not open university, but almost college courses, things like that. So I developed this whole background in, I've done all these qualifications, just as much as having the qualification to start understanding what I wanted to do, to have more interest and stuff.
And just on that point, did you find that, by actually just starting, by actually following things that interested you, things became a bit clearer without having a distinct plan from the start?
Yeah, totally. Because I kind of developed a timeline then. So it became clearer in what the way out of cycling would be. Instead of just riding up to my last race and stopping and thinking, what am I going to do now? I knew a bit about a world outside of it. I'd sort of stepped outside the bubble. And I started to put it into practice a bit as well, because I got interested in that type of stuff. I started picking up bits of work. So whether it was working with a young rider, whether it was doing bits for a coaching company or doing some consultancy stuff in the off season. So then, when I got to the end of that year after with Sigma and we went into the off season, as well as having, the traditional blowout and starting training and everything else, I had qualifications that I could go away and work with that people did look at and think, yeah, we want to work with Tom. He's obviously got a bit about him. And I also that year became acutely aware of kind of how your sponsors and the relationships that you build through cycling are quite powerful. So I got to know 2 or 3 guys at Sigma and 2 or 3 guys at Specialized really well. Just through conversations, literally from sitting around the table and having a curry with them. But instead of just talking to them about racing, I started talking to them about what I've been doing in the background, and that sparked their awareness. And I think they saw a bit of value in me because of that. And then that started to lead to, you're suddenly appearing at trade shows, you're representing products, you're doing a lot of things attached to cycling that's not necessarily riding the bike. And I really enjoyed it. And I think I raced better, actually. It did me a favor because I had something else to think about other than just racing. And I also didn't have this impending doom sort of feeling that I'd had the previous years, where I thought, if this ends at the end of the year, what am I going to do? Because I knew that, potentially I could pick up some work with the sponsors, that I had a bit of a lead into other areas. Wasn't a given, but I was just more confident that I had a plan B. So it was just about using the time to upskill myself, get to know people, and being a bit more aware of, as well as being a rider, you're almost a bit of a brand, and can you sell yourself a bit more? Can you position yourself so that people see a value in you that's not just a rider, but it's someone who maybe understands how to work with them, or how to sell products, or how to, whatever it might be. So that was probably the change that year.
And is this something that you just discovered yourself, or were you seeing other riders doing a similar thing? I mean, this sounds so similar to what Tom was talking about, Tom Barris.
Yeah, well, strangely, so me and Tom must have spent a lot of time together, and we never really spoke about this stuff at all. Right. We didn't really speak about cycling, either me or Tom. We just got and speak about any old rubbish. But I think, to be fair, we had a bit of a group. Looking back now, we had a bit of a group that we sort of knew our level. So I trained a lot with Tom, the Edmondsons when they were younger. Scott Thwaites is a couple of years younger than us, but when we were all kind of acutely aware, I think that we were, obviously Scott went on and rode at quite a high level and he's doing really well, but even Scott at a younger age was, be forever asking me, what's that qualification you've done or whatever. I think we all understood that we rode at a level where it could stop at any minute. And although we kind of aspired to be as good as we could be and we wanted to get better, I think we were quite realistic. I don't know if that's a Yorkshire thing. We're quite hard working up here anyway, and I think we're all quite realistic that maybe we need to have a plan B in the background. But having said that, we never really spoke to each other about it.
How funny.
So yeah, it sounds similar. It's only now looking back you think, oh, we were obviously all doing this in the background, but didn't really talk to each other about it too much.
I suppose it makes sense. I mean, I've heard it in other sports as well. Is that it's not something that people openly discuss. What are you going to do when you stop riding, or when your sport comes to an end?
Yeah. I don't know whether it's I don't know if you worry a bit about showing a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Because I think you do actually. I think you. That's probably a bad thing. I think you don't want to almost say, "Oh, I've got this plan to do this," because in effect you're putting your hands up and saying, "I might not be here next year." And I don't know if that's still the case now. I'd like to think it's not, but it probably was through my career. You never wanted to appear like you were doing anything other than giving 100% to racing, to anyone, whether it was the people you're racing with, training with, or particularly probably to sponsors and stuff, or definitely team managers, because you didn't want to appear like you weren't fully committed to the team and wanted to stay there. I think I was lucky at Sigma in that we were sponsored by some quite good sponsors that really, they wanted you to race well, but they did sort of care about you as well. It was a nice team, nice environment. And I think they almost, not on purpose, but I think they valued you putting things into you as a person and not just racing. I'm not sure you can say that for other teams. Other teams, it was 100% racing and they wanted the best out of you, which is fine. That's why you're there.
But it's a shame, though, isn't it? You say that they want the best out of you, when actually, for some people, like you described, getting the best out of you was having that other thing to focus on.
Yeah, no, totally. I don't know if it was when I was younger. When I was first got into it, I was probably as guilty as anybody as I'm 100% on this, and that's all I ever think about. I think sport at that level is quite selfish, isn't it? You have to be a bit like that. But yeah, definitely. As I got older, I flourished. I raced better when there was a proper team environment around you where people wanted to ride together, and almost like an underdog environment, really. Where people possibly did have a part-time job and things, and things were stacked against you sometimes. I kind of, and I definitely raced better in environments where you got involved in other stuff. So whether it was with the sponsors, or you went to a trade show, or you maybe did the amount of laps I did around Richmond Park with client rides with Sigma was ridiculous. But yeah, I raced better because you had other things to think about. So I think, I don't know how much is that's true now, but it would be nice to think that it's kind of valued, that people take qualifications and they've got other stuff going on, and it's not thought about a distraction.
Yeah. And why did you stop racing when you did? What was behind that decision?
Yeah, so a few things. It wasn't a simple start. I mean, riding at that level is so precarious, like we discussed. One reason was definitely that I was scraping around for a contract. I did get offers, but I was kind of aware that I was at an age where I had responsibilities. I was married by that point. My wife had been with me for most of my cycling journey. So you sort of start thinking, is it selfish to carry on? But also a big part of it was I didn't want to fall out of love with it. By that point, I made a decision that I wanted to coach. And I was already coaching quite a few riders and enjoying it. And I was also riding, and I was kind of leading the team on the road, but also half off it, with the logistics and trying to pep up the younger riders, trying to motivate them. So I'd sort of moved into almost a bit of a mentoring role anyway, completely by accident. But so moving to coaching was just an extension of that, really. It was just developing that a little bit further. So yeah, whether I'd have carried on if I had a dead cert contract, I'm not sure. Probably wouldn't have done anyway. I also wanted to stop and still enjoy riding my bike, because I think there's a lot of people that possibly go on that season or two too long, and then they never want to ride the bike again, or they just associate cycling as something that they're fed up with. And I wanted to stop and still get on my bike on a Sunday and ride to the cafe with the lads and have a laugh, and be able to almost revert back to right it was right back at the start, where you didn't have all these pressures or all these external chasing wins, getting contracts renewed, trying to appease sponsors, trying to survive at that level, where you just got on your bike because you fancied it and you went for a laugh with your mates. And I got to the point, I think, where if I'd have carried on another couple of years, I would have fallen into that trap and stopped enjoying it. So whereas now I can happily pick up the bike and ride, albeit quite slow.
Well, it might be slow in your eyes,
but I can jump on it and just enjoy it and go for a ride. And So I'm glad I stopped from that point of view, and that was definitely a big part of it. So sort of accumulation really of looking at the people around me and thinking, they've sacrificed a lot for me. I think it's time maybe that I let them get their wings a bit and drop back. Not really having a dead cert contract at an age where you've got responsibilities to pay the mortgage, thinking about little ones. And also, I just didn't want to fall out of love with it. I wanted to go into coaching really motivated to stay in the sport. Which I think looking back worked. It was the right time to do it.
Yeah. And then, well, that's quite again, it's a precarious thing to do, isn't it? You go from cycling, living contract to contract to actually running your own business, and that's not an easy thing to do. How long did it take for that to sort of get up and running?
Well, like I said, I'd been coaching a few lads anyway. So probably the last 2 or 3 years I was racing, I'd already started my coaching journey. Like we said, I'd spent a lot of time on training camps and stuff, kind of upskilling myself, and because you end up with a lot of knowledge, but you don't necessarily have the qualifications to back it up. So I'd done all that. And then I probably thought it was more secure than it was, if I'm honest. So I kind of thought I'll step into that and it'd be a nice self-employed business and enjoy it. And self-employed is probably as precarious at riding at that level, to be honest with you. But I just sort of backed myself, I think. I knew late on the year before that I was probably going to stop. So again, I had sort of 2 or 3 months of a contract to run out that I was earning a wage on. So I just worked really hard, super hard, every hour I could for those months where I still had a wage from cycling, to build up a client base that I knew would sustain me, at least to start with. And then I just didn't turn any opportunities down. I just looked at the first sort of 18 months, 2 years as I just need to grow my experience, but also as a business. And called upon my uni degree a little bit, I guess, in terms of how do you structure a business, how do you understand your finances, where are you going to go with it. But it was, the first 6 months was tricky, I must admit, because as precarious as cycling it was, I did have a guaranteed wage technically every month, and with self-employed, I didn't at all. So the first 6 months were pretty precarious, and then about 6 months in, I picked up a contract delivering some CPC training in the haulage industry, which is why I always say to riders now, look at the sponsors you've got, because that came about through, I rode for Metal Tech, Knights of Old, and Knights of Old is a haulage company. And they needed somebody with some cycling experience to develop a CPC course about cycling. So they rang me up, which was just a lucky shot, really.
What's the CPC course?
So I still deliver it now. So it was all about taking drivers out of their cabs, putting them on a bike, and creating a course that you do, say, 6 hours of training with them on the bike to make them aware of who they share the road with. So to give them awareness of the other side of the coin, if you like. And it is a partnership. It's not we're right, you're wrong, and it never has been. It's been about making them aware of just what it feels like to be on a bike in an urban environment. And then having a chat about it, basically. And it counts to their training hours that they have to do. They have to do 30 hours every 3 years. So they may go and do a first aid course, or they might go and do kind of an urban landscape course. But one of the things they can do is this surf urban driving course, which is the cycling element. So, and that was brand new, 6 years ago now. So I was just right place, right time. But what it did do is it expanded my business. It changed it from just coaching to actually working in more of a corporate environment and working with big businesses. And once I got to that point, that obviously brought a lot more guarantees in terms of number of courses booked, income, things like that. So I was going to say I was lucky. I guess I wasn't lucky because it comes about with a relationship you forged 3 or 4 years earlier. But it was a big changing point in terms of giving me a bit of security for being self-employed, and it changed me from just being a coach into a business, I would probably say.
And then did that mean that you had to expand and bring other coaches on board, which is a different proposition as well?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, so I had to I kind of have a team now that I've developed since then, really, of freelance coaches and trainers. So what it means is I guess I took a step back a bit in a way, and I manage the business now. So I sign the contracts and I market for the, I go and pitch for the work, and then quite often somebody who I trust and works with me goes and delivers it under my name. So I think even that step change is quite a challenge, because you become a brand rather than just an individual. You all of a sudden you're managing different types of people and you're having to motivate them. But that again, I think you learn a lot about that through your sport. How do you motivate someone? How do you deal with different people? How do you bring people together to work towards a common sort of goal? You could pick up any textbook at kind of university and it would tell you that's how you build a team, but it's completely true, I think. And I do think existing as a sportsman, it does give you a lot of those skills. You possibly don't realize it at the time, but I think when you stop racing and you go into the world of work, especially if you're going into the world where you may be managing a business or working with other people, those skills are really useful. So I think you almost need to not downplay that, really. And it's been kind of forward journey from there, really.
Yeah. And what's it like being on the other side of the fence, where you're coaching the riders who are doing the racing or entering the competitions? Is that quite difficult, or did you transition into that quite easily?
Yeah, I found it quite strange that first year to 18 months. I really enjoyed working with them, but I did quite often struggle to see actually go to an event, which I know for people might sound strange, but because working with them, even riding with them, training face to face, I loved it, and I really enjoy it now. That kind of hands-on element. But going to the event is stepping back into a world that you've lived in for quite a long time, and like you said, standing, you almost get really worked up. You're really ready for it, and then you don't race, and that's quite a strange feeling after so many years. But over time, it just becomes more normal, and your motivation changes. So you're no longer motivated by riding the event yourself. You're motivated by seeing people perform and being part of their kind of story. And now I'm used to going to events and standing on the other side and just enjoying it and seeing them ride well and feeling good about it because of that, or equally not going right and you're in the right place to kind of pick them up and support them. But yeah, it's that first 18 months is strange. Anyone who stopped racing and goes back to a race that first year and doesn't find it slightly odd, I think they're probably lying, because that's the world you've lived in, isn't it, for so long? And also I think there's so many people that stay in the sport, whether they're swan years or they're the mechanics, or it's really difficult to go back to a race and not meet a load of people you used to race with or you used to spend a lot of time with. And that element's a bit weird as well, because they used to know everything about you and now all of a sudden they don't. So it's a bit like being a stranger in your own kind of house. It's probably a good way of describing it, I think. But now it's quite funny now, because I'll go to an event and Dean will be there with his coaching company, Briggsy will be there maybe. So although we don't race anymore, that kind of competition's still there. It's healthy, we are quite, I know with Dean and Russ, I quite often, because we're both from Yorkshire, we'll be at the same events and we help each other out a lot, which is nice. But it's still nice to have that competitive element that we sort of continue through coaching, I think.
And is it fairly normal expected to move into a career within the cycling industry? Because I haven't interviewed or spoken to many people, former riders, that have gone into something completely different.
Yeah, I don't know really. I think a lot of people move into sort of sales, don't they, and things. I remember when I first thought, I'm going to stop riding. What am I going to do? And I didn't 100% believe in self-employed. I thought maybe I should go and get something a bit more secure. I sort of looked around and just thought of myself as a cyclist. So the places I looked for employment was cycling, just by definition, as that's what I thought people would look at me as. And I think they do a bit. People sort of almost wrongly look at you and think, well, that's all you're into. But it probably isn't actually. You might be really interested in something completely different. But that's the life you've lived for 10, 11 years. So I did find it quite difficult to get involved in anything that wasn't cycling for quite a while, even if I wanted to. So I worked for the National Cycling Charity on a contract there. That was really good, but again, it was cycling. I then worked on like a transport. It was all about developing sustainable transport in West Yorkshire, but again, it was driven by cycling. So it was quite difficult. And one thing that's really nice about what I do now, I've got the coaching and the work there that I absolutely love and really enjoy, but it's obviously 100% cycling. But I also work as a consultant in sustainable transport, which isn't about cycling, and people in that world don't really know me as a cyclist.
Yeah.
I mean, it usually comes up in conversation.
How did that come about?
That's really nice to have that. So I'd done this contract with the National Cycling Charity. So alongside working on my own business, I'd picked up various things with them, some as consultancy, some as employment. And they were always quite short contracts, sort of 6 months, deliver this project. So I was getting to know more and more people, and a lot of people on those places, because they're short contracts, they constantly jump around into different industries, and the next because what you realize is they're actually just project managers. So although they work in cycling, they could pick that experience up and deliver a project in a lot of other industries as well, because it's how you structure it and how you deliver it and how you put it together. It's not just the industry you're in. So I got to know a lot of people who all of a sudden kind of at the end of contracts disappeared and started delivering in a different industry, but kept in touch. So, and then I kind of, after working for the National Cycling Charity and transport things around cycling, after about 6 years, I'd wanted to try and broaden my horizons a bit and not just be a cyclist. So I started applying for consultancy roles alongside my coaching that were more kind of transport based. So maybe looking at EV, the EV chargers for cars and the infrastructure required in businesses for that, or maybe looking at kind of more, how do you manage transport strategies? So big businesses, what are they doing to influence people to get the bus into work rather than driving to work, and more environmental things, because I'm quite interested in that anyway. How do you lower carbon emissions? How do you be, a bit more sustainable in your life at work and at home? And by totally accident, I developed this kind of background. It was in cycling, but it was also in behaviour change. So people saw a value in me that I suddenly understood something other than just the bike. I understood how to motivate people to change. So some of the stuff in the cycling, for the National Cycling Charity, was about how do you use cycling as a tool to get people fit. So there might be people recovering from type 2 diabetes or in cancer remission, for example. And they're not cyclists. They're just people who you're using cyclists to kind of get them out and about and get them fit and develop a new behaviour. So once I delivered things like that and started to know people in other industries, I started to sell myself as a behaviour change person rather than a cyclist. And that, through various different means and delivering different projects, I've now ended up as a kind of a more rounded sort of person, I would say, in the sense that I now work in delivering sustainable transport strategies, so kind of changing behaviours and things rather than just looking at cycling. So don't get me wrong, it's still cycling element, but and that's super nice, because I can go and have a meeting with somebody, or I can exist in a world where it's nice that people recognise what maybe I achieved in cycling, but they don't talk to me as a cyclist. They talk to me as somebody who has got some skills outside of that. And for me, I think that's really healthy. It's really nice to go home at the end of the day and say to my wife or kids, or so-and-so has won this event, or they've done really well. And I've also signed that contract with a business park in Sheffield for whatever it might be. And it's nice to have the two elements. I think that's quite motivating, actually.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it sounds, I appreciate it probably wasn't, but it sounds, relatively not straightforward, but you've transitioned from being a cyclist and you found something that you love, and you're developing that business. a lot of sports people do struggle with that loss of identity, that you become so defined by the sport that you're involved in. Was that still tough? Did you, even though you were finding a new path, was that still hard to see yourself not as a cyclist anymore, or was it, professional?
Yeah, it was really hard, actually. I've made that sound really simple. It wasn't. There was, I had some dark days, actually, to be fair. I had some days where I thought I've made the right decision to stop. I kind of found that I had constant reminders of, you could have done this or you could have done that. Or, for example, Tour de Yorkshire started the year after I rode. And everybody I met for a year said, why didn't you carry on? You could have done the Tour de Yorkshire. And but I tell you what, I actually found most difficult, and what got me down the most in the first couple of years after racing, was I kind of was happy that I was fine with stopping. I was fine with going off and do something new. But a lot of the people around me, people I knew and people I also didn't know, just knew me so much as a cyclist that they'd almost constantly, I think they thought I'd have regrets, and they'd constantly kind of hark back to, do you think you'll get back into it? What are you going to do now? Are you sure you should be doing that? And I think those outside pressures kind of can get you down, because they make you question what you're doing sometimes. And I don't think they do it on purpose. It's just they know you so much as one person.
And they probably do it out of concern, don't they?
Yeah, and I stopped racing, and I thought I'm going to carry on racing, but at a lot lower level. So I'll go and do some third car and some amateur races, because I still enjoyed riding my bike. And I didn't want to travel around the country because I had other things on. So I thought I'll go and do some local races. But I'd turn up to the local races, and everybody, from the minute you got in the car park, would expect you to win. And I wouldn't have been training all week. I'd have been at work or doing something else. So I knew I was comfortable with finishing 25th and just enjoying it for what it was. And turning it, to me, it was just a social thing that I wanted to do for fun. But other people associated you with Tom, who's ridden the Tour of Britain or whatever. And I found that really hard. I found it I'd stopped racing in the end. I did 2 or 3 races, and I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the gossip in the car park. I didn't enjoy the constant pressure of everybody thinking you should win. I didn't enjoy when you didn't win. Everybody sort of looked at you as if to say, what's wrong with you? Yeah. So it drove me. I enjoyed it so little, I stopped racing. Because I ended up, I remember saying to my wife, I just want to go and have a laugh. I don't really, but people, so I actually struggled more with kind of how other people felt they could talk to you than how I was, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I felt like I had to completely step away from it. So I did pretty much, although I was coaching, so I was involved in that sense. I didn't do any amateur races. I didn't really get involved too much in the club scene. I just went away for a period of time and thought, right, I'm going to have a complete break for it, so that when I come back, hopefully people have they don't associate me too much with Tom from before, and they now associate me with Tom who's come back slightly slower but still enthusiastic about it, and who's now got this job, and that kind of work. But I do think it's a shame. I would have preferred to have kind of wound down really and just stayed a bit more involved in it and enjoyed it, but it was too difficult. It was a constant kind of just nagging at you, I felt, and I think that did get me down a lot. And I did, as I think you're right, I did struggle a little bit in terms of I'd become Tom the cyclist, and then redefining yourself and becoming something else is quite difficult overnight. I think to start with, you think you can do it. You think, oh, I'll get involved in this, I'll head off in this new direction, but actually that's all you've done for sort of 12, 15 years, and to suddenly be somebody else is quite hard. And I did, it was a struggle. I made it sound really smooth from where I was to where I am now, but it wasn't. I'd say, the first 2, even 3 years, I had a few dark days. I questioned myself. I wondered if I was doing the right thing. I didn't always enjoy the kind of area I went to work in. And I was thinking, oh God, have I defined myself as this now, or can I go and do something else? It is hard to redefine yourself, I think. And it's definitely harder because everybody else knows you as that as well.
Yeah, I think you battle with your own thoughts about yourself and the years of conditioning, of thinking in a certain way, of being a certain person, and then you're battling against other people's expectations and perceptions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got some really good people around me, and I think that's super important. I think if you've got good people around you, say, no, you know, use all the good things that you had from racing, how motivated you were to train and do well, and how sort of competitive you were, put it into your working life and be successful in that. But it is tricky. And there's a bit of another thing that's slightly tricky is you go into work and you're almost a generation behind where you would have entered it. You know, so you're going for interviews and stuff, or you're pitching for work against people who are 10 years younger than you, or you go into a qualification and everyone on your course is 10 years younger than you. It's a strange environment. You feel like you've sort of been parachuted into somewhere that you don't necessarily fit. But I think it only lasts for a period of time, and then you do redefine yourself, and people start to become aware of, you know, what you did, but also what you're doing now. But yeah, it's not. I don't think anyone will stop racing if they were full time and just happily redefine themselves without some dark days and wondering where they should be going and what they should be doing.
Yeah. And on that note, I'm conscious of time. I really appreciate you sharing so much of your time already. Without putting you on the spot too much, but any quick tips for riders who are currently racing in terms of, I suppose, preparing themselves for when it does finish, but also things that could help them whilst they're still racing?
Yeah, so definitely, I think it's been said before to you in other kind of interviews you've done, but yeah, definitely kind of look at your spare time and think how productive you can be. Because I don't think you realise necessarily until you get a bit older what you could do with that time. You know, so is there some qualifications you could do, even just you know, stuff you might be interested in? Take your books away on your training camps. You know, not saying do it all the time. You've got to have time with your teammates. You've got to enjoy the experience of being a full-time athlete. But there's no harm in using some of that time to get yourself ready for what you might want to do when it ends in 3-4 years' time. And also, I just think don't get too caught up in it. You know, prepare yourself for your exit and also enjoy it while you're there, because you know, it's, especially racing in this country, it is precarious, and there will come a time where you need other skills, and you will be doing something else. So yeah, have a plan. And yeah, probably the final thing is look at who's around you. So there's a lot of value in cycling. There's obviously a lot of people involved in it who are sponsors, who are external to you as a rider. So making contact with them, being nice with them, you know, being impressionable, but soaking all of the kind of experience they've got from the industries they work in is good, because one, it gives you contacts when you end that you might be able to go back and call on, but it also maybe helps you make decisions around, well, what are you interested in other than cycling? So prime example, I had Andy Swain down at Metal Tech with his engineering. You know, I wouldn't know the first thing about engineering, but it was, you know, it was nice to get to know Andy and the things that he did down in his warehouse. It was nice to get to know the haulage drivers through the sponsorship that we had with Metal Tech and Knights of Old. Specialized, you know, working with them to really understand their products and how they sell them and the events that they go to and the different roles that they have for Specialized. I definitely have called on all of that since I stopped racing. And I think at the time I didn't do it on purpose. I was just interested. But I would definitely say to people now who are racing, there's a lot of contacts around you. If you're not too blinkered at just looking at the racing and you look at kind of who sponsors you, who's turning up to pump your tires up, what do all these people do, there's a lot of value in understanding them and making relationships with them that might really come round for you when you stop racing. So yeah, spend some time and get to know them.
Brilliant. No, that's such good advice. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate that. That's been almost an hour, so I'm really thankful that you know, you shared your experiences and your time. So yeah, massive thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks for the invite, and yeah, I'll keep watching with interest at what comes up. So it's nice to see sort of the journey that the younger riders are going through now as well. So it's nice to see on the blogs and stuff like that. So I will keep in touch, and all the best.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Speak soon.
See you
Take
later.
care. Bye.